We're now moving into a public hearing section. This is item number 15. One is to review two draft City Council district maps, A2 and A3, and select for a final district map. And thank you. Adopt ordinance number 752, first reading, approving the final City Council district map and scheduling for a second hearing on April 11th, 2022. And with that, could I have staff report, please?
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to do a team presentation on this, similar to what we did at your last meeting. I'll be starting off and giving an overview. I'll turn it over to Olivia to get into some of the details. And Paul Mitchell is also here from Redistricting Partners, representing our consultant team. So there's two matters on your agenda tonight, you'll have noticed. One is to consider approving a final map and adopting ordinance number 752 in order to implement that in the city's municipal code. The second, which is the subsequent agenda matter, has to do with the sequencing schedule. So we're taking these one at a time as separate matters. Important for the public that's participating tonight to know that this first matter that we're presenting now, the staff presentation, is the matter on final map consideration. Sequencing will come next. So we're taking these matters one at a time as separate matters. There are, in terms of the final map, there's two that are available for action tonight by the council. It doesn't mean the council can't take a step back and ask us to bring back other maps. They could do that, but there's two that have been advertised at the direction of the council for consideration this evening. We refer to them as maps A2 and A3. Olivia will, in reviewing the background, talk about the meetings that were held leading up to tonight, factors to be considered in choosing or developing maps for your consideration, and we'll give a special focus on a matter not to be considered that we've talked about at past meetings, and that's incumbency of council members as a factor in determining district mapping. The council has discussed this somewhat in deliberations, but we've also received a number of public comments around this matter, so we wanted to have Paul Mitchell speak to the incumbency as a factor. We know there's other districts, school districts and cities that have considered that, and one school board member in particular wrote a letter to your council suggesting that this factor should be considered, and so we wanted to address that head on. Olivia will be going over similarities and differences between maps A2 and A3 in order to facilitate your deliberation on the two maps, along, of course, with public comment that you'll receive this evening. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Olivia.
Good evening. This introduction, or this discussion, this background is for your benefit, for the benefit of the public, and also to help us review where we've been and how we got here. So, as you may remember, there was a committee, an ad hoc committee that was set up by including two members, and it included Vice Mayor Clark and Councilmember Alarcon. And the purpose was to come up with a process for public outreach. And the committee's work ended on October 20th of last year, 2021. At the time, no maps were recommended by this ad hoc committee, and the only time that they discussed mapping was when they talked about drawing communities of interest. Then we have held a lot of meetings, including 10 public meetings where district elections have been discussed, 5 scheduled hearings, including this one, 3 public workshops regarding district maps and communities of interest. There was a website set up and other outreach and education tools, including, well, the website was the biggest one, and we have posted all of the public comments and all of the communication that has come in via email, via the website itself. And the reason why comments did not go up on the website directly is to protect from spam and from comments that should not be on a government website. Then there were the mapping tools. So there was an online mapping version, which was a District R, which was dynamic. And then there were paper maps that were mailed to every address in the city. We received 161 maps to date, which is a really robust engagement. And our consultants, in conversation and confirming some of the discussions around engagement, told us that they work with some of the largest cities in the state, including Los Angeles, and we received more than Los Angeles, the city of LA. So it speaks to the commitment of the community to be engaged in this process. So then the maps were developed for the January 24th City Council meeting. There were 3 maps just to kind of begin the process somewhere. So rather than have to parse out all of the maps together, the consultants drew 3 maps. And all of these maps were determined to follow legal compliance, and they were drafted based on maps that were submitted by both including communities of interest maps and district election maps, which were kind of phase 1 and phase 2. The mapping criteria established by the Fair Maps Act, and Fair Maps is actually short for Fair and Inclusive Redistricting for Municipalities and Political Subdivisions Act, mandates that a set of criteria must be followed when drawing these maps. To the extent practicable, district lines will be adopted using the following criteria. Districts have to be relative equal size, contiguous, maintain communities of interest, follow city and census designated place boundaries, and keep districts compact. The feedback received at this meeting was unanimous to elevate Map A for further consideration with a change to District D so that it wouldn't fall below the freeway map. At the February 28th meeting, consultants presented Map A2, which was then a map with the edits that had been requested. At this meeting, Vice Mayor Clark and Councilmember Alarcon commented on the changes that they wished to see to Map A2, and that included reducing the deviation from 9.6% and adjusting the common boundaries to districts to the boundary to districts AB and BD. The final vote was only to consider Map A2. At the March 14th meeting, City Council meeting, the Council elected to reconsider this decision. And in response to the Council deliberation and deliberate again on the decision that had been taken on February 28th. At this meeting on March 14th, the Council voted to consider Map A2 and A3 for today's final meeting. Now we'll do a comparison of maps A2 and A3. Maps A2 and A3 are both mostly the same. They're legally defensible and follow criteria outlined by the Fair Maps Act. They are derived from Map A. They are less than 10% deviation. They use the 101 as a boundary. They keep the coast together. They keep the northeast together. They keep the downtown beach area together. And they have 5 contiguous districts. And they follow city and U.S. designated place boundaries. What is different about maps A2 and A3 are the deviation. Map A2 is 9.2% deviation. Map A3 is 8.2% deviation. In Map A, districts A, B, and D are less compact by comparison to districts A, B, and D in Map A3. And then a note about communities of interest. We have received a lot of feedback about the communities of interest and whether or not they are maintained together. And this determination is subjective. Identification of communities of interest can be defined from the maps that were submitted by the public. The city's consultant has determined that either map may be found to be appropriate to represent the communities of interest reflected in both of the community of interest and draft maps submitted. And so that's the comparison of the maps. Lastly, we'll talk about the ordinance, Ordinance 752. Ordinance 752 adds Chapter 2.06 to the Carpinteria Municipal Code and includes a declaration of purpose from at-large to district elections. It establishes 5 districts as described in the selected map, whatever you choose. It also establishes the election of members of the city council by district, which means members of the city council can only represent constituents that live in that district, and constituents can only vote for council members in that district. Council members will still be elected to 4-year terms. Also included in the ordinance, it says a vacancy of a district elected member can be filled by appointment or special election. The council maps will be kept by the city clerk official records and by the county elections office. And I think, did you want to turn it over to Paul? Paul? Paul is on Zoom.
Thank you very much. Can you see me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for having me here. We've been participating with you in this process for a couple of years now. And actually, in that time, we have worked both on implementing the California Voting Rights Act and the Fair Maps Act, as was mentioned, which actually wasn't even law when we first started talking about this process. So the process we did, as was mentioned, had more maps than the City of LA. The City of LA had 157 public submissions, and so you narrowly beat them, and more public submissions than any of our other mapping projects in other jurisdictions. So I think real kudos to the community for that. I do want to address the things that were mentioned. First off, the 2 maps are very, very similar. In a way, the differences between the 2 maps are simply moving 1 census block. There is 1 census block in the draft maps that is north of the freeway between what will end up being districts 3 and 4. That 1 census block is 247 people. And when we moved it in A2 to A3, when we moved it in A2 to A3, it created a large deviation in that central district above the freeway, District 3. That deviation was so large it had to be balanced somewhere else. And without crossing the freeway, the only way to go would be get some population from the west. There are literally only 2 census blocks we could choose from. And one of them, the most immediate one, had too much population, and the other one would have created a non-contiguous issue. So we take the one with a little bit too much population, then we had to actually give back. And so in the process of adjusting those boundaries, there literally was only one way to make that single census block adjustment and then maintain that equal population. This is a unique issue that comes up when we're dealing with small agencies where a census block can be 10% of a district size, as it is in this case. I want to also address, as has been discussed, that we are doing all of this mapping in the public. The discussions that were had at public hearings, all the recommended changes and discussions about those changes were being done within these public hearings and without any other kind of side conversations. And I'm happy to address any other questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Mayor, yes, Paul, before we get to questions, we also wanted to, if you could address the incumbency question as a factor. Thank you.
Yeah, so redistricting throughout the state and throughout the country can vary. It definitely varies by state. We know that comparing California's redistricting to national redistricting norms are very different. And then within California, there are different rules for legislative and congressional, supervisor and city under the Fair Maps Act, school boards, water districts, they each have different code sections that they follow for redistricting. And within city and county redistricting, there's only one place it mentions incumbents, and that is to say that they cannot be considered as a community of interest. So that seems clear. You can't come into the redistricting and say, my community of interest is me. I'm a candidate for office and I want to draw a district that, benefits me. So that's not allowed. The other factor in the redistricting for cities and counties is they are required to follow a ranked set of criteria. After that ranked set of criteria, they could add additional criteria, but the idea is that they have to draw districts that are equal size, follow the Federal Voting Rights Act, are compact, contiguous, preserve communities of interest, don't consider incumbents, and so on. The considering of incumbents in city and county redistricting is seen as being prohibited based on all of that language. It prohibits them from being a community of interest, and in creating the rank criteria makes it really hard to say, well, yeah, we want to address all those rank criteria, but really we want to put it where incumbents live as being the first criteria. That would not be allowed. So when we do redistricting and redistricting partners, we do not know where the incumbents live. We don't ask for that information. There might be claims that in other agencies people are doing that, but it's definitely not our practice. It's definitely not the best practice, and it's not one that we've engaged in with the city of Carpinteria. I do know that a school board member had suggested that you can, and technically you can, in school board redistricting, consider where incumbents are. But the fact is, even in our other local government redistricting, we tend to discourage the use of incumbents as a factor because it does end up causing you to create districts that get away from those higher rank criteria. And we try to get all of our local agencies to kind of follow the rules that are for cities and counties in terms of best practice or norms for the redistricting process. So we don't know where any of the incumbents live to this day. And none of our staff had that information.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just wrap up before we go to questions to talk about next steps, if that's all right, Mayor. Well, obviously, as I mentioned at the outset, we'll talk after your council takes action on the maps about sequencing schedule to go with the map. That's the next agenda matter. We'll also, assuming your council approves on first reading the ordinance before you tonight, selects a map and chooses approves the ordinance. We'll hold a second reading on April 11th. That's important to conclude the second reading because, as we've mentioned before, we're due to submit materials on the map to the county elections office toward the end of the month on the 22nd. And we'll do that along with legal descriptions and all the requisite filing materials to the county by that deadline. That concludes our staff presentation. Mayor.
Great. Thank you. Questions of staff?
Through the mayor, I have a question for Paul. We have several districts where the boundaries of the districts lie right in the middle of the street. We have El Caro, 9th Street, Elm, Star Pine, and there's a few other that slips to my mind right now. But what are your thoughts and feelings on what that does to that street and what that does to our community?
Well, it's natural in redistricting that when you draw district lines, you're going to have people live on either side. And so if you have a district line that goes down the street and you can see across the street as the adjacent district, that will come up. People say, wait, why am I in the same district? Is it a different district than the guy across the street? Well, that's going to come up anytime you're redistricting. And in some places, they've tried to draw districts where they keep both sides of the street in the same district. And then people come forward and say, wait a second, why am I in one district and the guy behind me and behind my backyard is in another district? It always is going to create a conversation piece almost, if nothing else. People saying that, I'm in one district, but the person catty corner from me is in another district. The census blocks do go down the middles of the streets. They don't capture streets. So like Main Street, if you were to want to take a Main Street and have both sides of the street be in the same district, you'd likely have to move the district line up one block in order for both sides of that major street to be in the same district. And we've seen that a lot in cities where they say, well, this one downtown street, I use Main Street as an example, Main Street, we want to have both sides be in the same district. And so they'll draw districts in a way that can maintain that. But if you were just to let the line fall naturally on Main Street, it would split the city down the middle just because that's the way the census blocks largely are constructed.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Hey, Paul. How did A3, that map, come about? Can you give a background?
Yeah, it actually, it's interesting. It came about as a result of a question about whether or not we could move that one census block. And then subsequent to that conversation that was at an earlier meeting, and Sofia Garcia was managing the process for that hearing, there was then a public submission that came in that did that very thing. Somebody can remind me the name of the person who submitted it, but it was a public submission of just 2 districts. And those 2 districts matched up exactly to the 2 districts that we were playing with if you were to move that one census block, because literally there was only one way to draw that. And so at the hearing that we had, the last hearing, I was able to hear the conversation, look on district or what was being drawn, bring up this, create a quick atlas of it, which is the PDF version, and then show side by side that construction to the construction on districtor of just the 2 districts that have been submitted by a member of the public, to see what they look like side by side and kind of allow the community and the council to see that they were in fact the same construction of 2 districts. And so after the hearing, or maybe even before the hearing was done, I ended up just emailing staff that PDF and web map so that they could have that as an option to consider. And then the council obviously agendized for this hearing to have both of those maps be available.
Okay. Is there a map A4, A5, or just
No.
those 2?
There's no A4 or A5.
Got it.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will now open this up for public comment. I have currently about a dozen speaker slips. So want to give everybody the opportunity to speak, but I'm going to limit the time to 3 minutes. So if you could please respect that time limit there. We're going to have, I believe, 3 beeps.
He's coming here.
Yeah, that's okay, thanks.
Brian, here's another one you can hand away.
Thank you. Let's make it official. We're on screen. Thank you. Okay, starting with speaker slip number 1, I have Donna Jordan.
Thank you, Council. I'm just going to make one comment before I get into what I actually was going to say. And that is what's missing in all of this so far, especially what we just heard from the consultant, is why in the first place that one census block went over into Area B, because it made Area D bigger, and then you had to go over and change everything on the other side. When here's Casitas Pass Road, a main highway, I just do not understand how that got there in the first place. But Map A3 fixes all of that. So almost all of those split neighborhoods where it goes down the middle go away. So I just don't understand why they think they're almost equal. Tonight I'd like to emphasize 2 important terms, though, that are crucial to this whole discussion: process and intent. Creation of district election maps is a well-defined, if rather complex, process. It has rules and protocols to follow. It is not a popularity contest. It is definitely not about any individual. The intent of that process is clear: to provide the fairest and most balanced election districts for the community. Map A3 is clearly more in compliance than A2 with the legal standards set up to judge them. It doesn't just squeak in, it is more compliant. Some supporters of Map A2 have come very close to admitting that their support reflects a desire to see 2 incumbent council members placed in separate districts. This is directly counter to the intent of the Elections Code. It would divide several tight-knit local communities of interest, and it's just plain wrong. Council members Nomura and Lee clearly live in the same area, bounded by Foothill, the freeway, Linden, and Casitas Pass Road. Casitas is the obvious boundary for separating election district. It's a highway. It is not a small dead-end street like Star Pine. No offense to the Star Piners. The people who live in Area B have interests that are different from the Baylor District Area D, which is where Map A2 would put them. Look across the freeway, too, if you will. Council incumbents Carty and Clark are in the same situation as Nomura and Lee. They live in the same neighborhood. They will be facing the same decisions about their political futures. And there are going to be some tough decisions to be made by the incumbents about whether to run in the next election. That is an unavoidable consequence of this process. It's not a consideration. Tonight, your council still has to complete the process, honestly and fairly. Your job, your responsibility to the community is to choose the best map, and I might add, to publicly justify that choice. Map A3 is a clear, correct, and fair choice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I now have Bob Jordan.
Two for the price of one, right? Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I am here to request that the council vote to adopt redistricting map A3 because it's a better map that cures the defects inherent in map A2. Map A2 appears manipulated. Map A3 does not. Map A3 offers geographically contiguous and compact council district boundaries that best conform to the legal requirements as set forth in California Elections Code Section 21601C. Map 3 also shows the highest level of compliance to the local community of interest rule, also as set forth in this Section 21601C. In this rule, a community of interest is defined as, quote, a population that shares common social or economic interest that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. Some district lines, as drawn on map A2, fail in this regard, as they divide obvious communities of interest, such as those on Star Pine Road and Pacific Village Drive. Further study of map A3 reveals another mapping irregularity that fails to comply with another legal requirement in Section 21601C that, quote, council district boundaries should be easily identifiable and understandable by residents. To summarize, the defects inherent in map A2 will be cured by your adoption of map A3. Adopting map 3 is the right thing to do for all the right reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Russell Ruiz.
Good evening, council members. For the record, I'm Russell Ruiz. I have submitted my written comments. What I have to say tonight is primarily for dramatic effect. I even made a prop. Coastal View ad. This is a big deal. That is one of the reasons I wanted to be here in person tonight. District elections will change our city government forever. As you know, I'm not an advocate for district elections, but unfortunately we did not get to vote on that one. And so here we go. I certainly hope we get off on the right foot. I watched and participated in every district election committee meeting. Unfortunately, there was not much public participation there. Many of those meetings, I was the only member of the public. I've watched every council meeting on the subject. I've read everything published by the city on the website and in staff reports, and I came to this with a unique background with local district elections. I know the city has expended significant effort in this process, but unfortunately, we did not get much public participation until the last meeting. After all that effort, this is not complicated, and it is not supposed to be. If it is complicated and controversial, that's a good sign there's something wrong here. I would characterize the law and the rules applicable to districting as trying to keep people from making this complicated and controversial. For tonight, my theme is simple. Your eyes do not lie. A proper district map is not supposed to look like a jigsaw puzzle. When you have to draw a jigsaw puzzle to achieve a map you like, you need to acknowledge there's something wrong here. My prop for this evening, I thought the Coastal View ad was very effective in showing the two maps side by side with the colors. It really illustrates my point, I believe. Jigsaw puzzle, interior boundaries on District B, west side, east side. Not good. Nice, clean district boundaries. Easy for everyone to understand. A3. This is good map making. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Mike Wondolowski.
Good evening. I'm Mike Wondolowski, president of Carpinteria Valley Association. First, I want to thank you for deciding to consider Map A3 in addition to Map A2 tonight. As I stated in a previous written comment to the council on this issue, regardless of the actual motivations for selecting specific district boundaries, appearances matter. Decisions must be supported by sound and transparent reasoning. The staff report, the written report, and what we heard tonight gives a comparison of maps A2 and A3 with respect to the 5 criteria used by the consultant in the creation of the draft maps. The report stated that map A3 has a slightly better balance of population and has districts that are more compact in geometric shape. That's in reference to map A3 eliminating the zigzag appendage on the west end of District D and the odd J-shape appendage on the southwest side of District B on map A2. The staff report states the other 3 criteria are comparable. Regarding criteria about maintaining communities of interest, the staff report limited itself to considering communities of interest reflected in maps submitted by the public. It's not reported that map A2 splits, as we've heard, the Star Pine and Pacific Village neighborhoods, and map A3 does not. I find it, frankly, somewhat silly to imply that the public should have submitted maps documenting every single neighborhood in the city just to ensure that it would be considered as a community of interest tonight. I, for one, trust that staff and the council have the common sense to recognize those neighborhoods as communities of interest that need to be recognized. Now that you have these 2 maps in front of you, the only acceptable reason to select one over the other is based on which map better meets the districting criteria. To me, it's obvious that map A3 is superior. If any council member sees map A2 as superior, in the interest of sound and transparent reasoning, it's important to state clearly exactly under which districting criteria it is superior. I look forward to the council making an easy and unanimous selection of map A3 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Rhodes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council, staff, and members of the public. Some of you may have seen my letter to the Coastal View a few weeks ago, taking a little poke at the school district for being so transparent and saying they were trying to protect a couple of seats. Now, obviously, they're allowed to do that, but it seemed to be their number one priority. And I took a little tongue-in-cheek poke at them, saying not only are they teaching about gerrymandering, telling about gerrymandering in their history courses, but they're actually showing the students how to do it. At the time I wrote that letter, I was bragging to people and telling friends and neighbors the school district really should be doing it the way the city is doing it. in a more thoughtful way, more in keeping with what redistricting is all about. Regretfully, I said that before former County Supervisor Gail Marshall and others suggested that we all take a closer look at the map A2 that the city was considering at the time and that we've talked about tonight. I followed that suggestion and soon realized maybe I should have written my letter about the city process, because at least the school district was being transparent. Maybe this is a time to remind ourselves that early in this process, the city set out 5 essential criteria to use in drawing new district lines that intend to follow state and federal laws as well as districting best practices. Criteria number 2 states that the Federal Voting Rights Act will be followed to ensure there is no discrimination or weakening of communities protected by the Act. Criteria 3 states that local neighborhoods and communities will be respected in a manner that minimizes the division and empowers the residents. Number 4 states that district lines will follow identifiable boundaries that follow natural and artificial barriers such as rivers, streets, highways, rail lines, etc. And 5 states that boundaries will not being underlined here, not be drawn with the interest of council member or candidate residences. Our community should be grateful that a second map, A3, is also on the table now tonight before you, and previous speakers have spoken to that. Thanks to the efforts of Gail Marshall, former Mayor Donna Jordan, and others well-versed in the demographic and neighborhood layout of our small town, as well as the importance of protecting communities of interest, this map better meets the 5 criteria that you set down at the offset of this process. And I encourage the council tonight to adopt map A3 as our final district map. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Marshall?
Well, you sit there for a while and you kind of get stove up. Mayor and council, thank you for the opportunity. There's going to be a lot of redundancy tonight, I'm sure, and I'm going to participate in that redundancy. The criteria your council agreed upon to help you decide how to fairly draw the new district map posted on the city's webpage is clear and was derived from federal and state law, traditional redistricting principles as outlined by your consultant, and really importantly, the guidelines you as council members agreed upon early in the process. Map A2, which the council majority voted to approve on February 28th, violates 2 of your own criteria. It divides and therefore disrespects both the Star Pine neighborhood and the Pacific Village neighborhood. And A2 was clearly drawn to protect 2 council seats. Consideration of incumbents' addresses is a no-no. I want to make perfectly clear that I do not think that any of your council members drew map A2. I'm sure map A2 was put together by those individuals who want Roy and Wade to retain their seats for their own reasons. So, not drawn by you. But your support of map A2 means you support a map that ensures the retention of the seats of 2 council members, very much against your established guidelines for designing the initial districts for Carpinteria. I need to point out that both Al and Greg live in my neighborhood. I could have easily submitted a map that met all but one of the council criteria for districting by drawing a line right down Cayocho. Then I could have encouraged a bunch of neighbors to submit similar maps because they like Al and Greg too. But that would have been self-serving, so I did not. Now, look, this isn't a beauty contest. This is not a personality contest. This is a legal proceeding that will have an effect on our city for many years to come. So I'm asking you to put your personal feelings aside, reject map A2, and approve the better map, A3. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Sheila Tenold.
Thank you, Mayor Nomura and Council. I'm a Star Piner, and I've lived on Star Pine since 1974. And one of my neighbors is here also. And I know some of us have sent in comments. I got involved when I found out that our street was being divided. And I mean, we are a neighborhood. We're a dead end, and one entrance, one exit. No sidewalks, so we are a little community. We have a 4th of July parade on our street only. It's with all of our neighbor kids. We have 2 places to have hot dogs. The Old People's House, my next door neighbor does it every year, and down the street, the Blairs have a giant place, and they have all the kids with all the hot dogs down there. And then we have the big parade, and everybody brings out their chairs up and down the street. So we definitely are a social community. And of course, everybody knows who's been here a long time knows we are Candlestick Lane. If you haven't been here, then you need to come at Christmas time and see our candles that go all the way down our one little neighborhood. And I don't want to take up more of your time, but I do want to say that we want to stay together as a neighborhood. So I support map A3, as do a lot of other people. Zahid, Blair, Robin, Patsy Mayer, if you remember Nancy Mayer, who owned the Hallmark. They live across the street. Their son lives there. And anyway, that's my feeling about it, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Jason Rodriguez.
Like my friend Russell Ruiz, I also brought some props. Those are the jigsaw puzzle that is the water district's redistricting process that's actively going on now. And I'll get back to that more here in a little bit. First of all, Vice Mayor Clark, I wanted to say thank you for receiving my comments last meeting, and more importantly, thank you for having the conversation we had afterwards. I respect each of you and consider all of you political allies, as I'm sure this whole room does. Tonight, I would like to contrast the source of public comments on the water district redistricting process compared to this one. Both are actively taking place. At the time the water district map was being formed, the 2020 census data was not yet available. The water district therefore had to rely on 2010 census data to create the district divisions in such a way that they were in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. So what was created from that is the magenta map, which is this one here. In 2021, the 2020 demographic data was certified for use by the Census Bureau. Because of this, minor adjustments had to be made to the Water District's 2020 approved map. This new map will be effective for the 2022 elections, and this is minimal change map 1. 2 takeaways from this map, and you'll see those on your handouts I gave you. So a qualified demographer, this one hired by the Water District, certified a map that uses Star Pine Road as a boundary between districts. The Star Pine Road boundary was a product of a revision by the demographer due to the 2020 census data. The same rules apply to both demographers, this council redistricting and the water district, including recognizing communities of interest. Yet no one is arguing the placement of that boundary. I'm not sure why. As Olivia stated, communities of interest are considered something that are subjective in this matter. As many of you know, I'm on the Architectural Review Board, and I appreciate that position. One of the rules, if you will, is to analyze each one of these projects objectively, not subjectively, as subjectively would be looking at it with personal opinion or feelings. That, in a process like this, is not how you want to run things. Second point, some people have an issue with the shapes of the districts that the City Council map demographer shaped based on the data from 161 maps that created A2. Looking at the water district map, no one is complaining about those shapes. Those are, like I mentioned in the beginning of my comments, some jigsaw-shaped puzzles. And again, no one's complaining about that. Why? I reference back to my opinion letter published in last week's Coastal View newspaper. A2 is the product of 161 maps. A3, not so many. Mayor Nomura, Councilman Carty, Councilman Lee, stand with the people who have cared about this process since the beginning, and who also submitted maps before the deadline. This whole time you have only been in favor of the map that was made by the citizens, map A2. Changing your minds now would make a lot of people scratch their heads, especially with this information I'm sharing about the water district and the placement of Star Pine Road as a boundary. We the people submitted tons of data to a demographer who did the hardest part for all of us, yourselves included. They drew the lines from 161 maps. The cherry on top, all 5 of you agreed that map A2 was, or how map A2 was formed was best by moving the district and not having the 101 split them. So at one point, you guys were all in agreement about this. Anyways, I would like you to vote for A2, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Lorraine McIntyre.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. After listening to some of the prior comments, I have to say I'm so disappointed in some of the petty comments that are being made with accusations that are unfounded based on emotion and not on logic. The maps were drawn by professionals, as Jason mentioned, based on census blocks. You didn't make census blocks. We didn't make census blocks. We can't help that they divide streets. It's just the way it is. We have to put on our, big people pants and just accept that that's the way it is. We can't blame that. But the reason I'm here today is to encourage the council to approve map A2. It's based on logic and not emotions. I, for one, represent District D with respect to drawing map 2 the way that I drew it. And early on in the process, the council encouraged us to talk to our neighbors and to get them excited and interested in this process. As Jason pointed out, early on, you had 160 people that were part of this process. Somebody previously said he was at every meeting. Well, I was at every meeting. Maybe I wasn't at the, workshops, but I was at every meeting being involved and getting my neighbors involved in the process. I'm on the homeowners association for my neighborhood, and we're all concerned about exit and enter into the Via Real. When you look at map D, District D on map A2, it goes all the way to Linden. And that's the only in and out for these people in the neighborhoods is Via Real. So I would really appreciate if the council could address Via Real in District D in your deliberations. Why is that not a consideration? Why is that not a community of interest? When you look at evacuation routes, if there were fires or floods, everybody in District D has to go out on Via Real. Why do we want to carve out a little section that says, oh yeah, you can only get in and out of your house on Via Real, but you're in a different district because some people complained about irregularly shaped borders? I don't think that's relevant at all. I think you should base it on logic. And so I really encourage you to vote to move forward with A2, as you had early on in the process thought that that was the best map. When you look at the maps, 101 is a natural border, a natural boundary. Linden is a natural boundary. Via Real is a natural boundary. Carpinteria Avenue is a natural boundary. Why would you say that in this one little section you're going to move that boundary to Casitas Pass when no other boundary is on Casitas Pass? So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Kevin Tui.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for being here and holding these meetings. I better use my glasses. Didn't have to, but time goes on. I'm here in support of map A2. My reasons are simple, and by comparison to the choice of A3. First is that A2 was designed by an outside third-party consultant who was vetted by the council and staff and hired by the city, as you know. A2 was drawn without bias or an agenda, notwithstanding the insinuation of some others that have spoken this evening. A2 was part of a transparent community-wide process that had 161 map entries submitted by the citizens of Carpinteria, which also, as you heard, was significant compared to cities like Los Angeles and others. A2 had many people in favor of it compared to any other maps. A2 was voted and decided upon by this council, each of you. In essence, A2 is the people's choice. By comparison, map A3, from what I understand, was drawn by 2 or 3 people. A3 did not have any community review or involvement, and thus A3 was not developed in what I would call a transparent process. A3 did not have a wide swath of Carpinteria citizens review and contribute to it. A3 was only initially offered for public view in this chamber just 2 weeks ago, without any debate or opportunity for public review or participation. And after many months of district map planning, multiple community-wide meetings, of which there were 18 or more, and news notices and citizens' involvement, map A2 was the choice. A3 was not. Notwithstanding Donna Jordan's comments that A3 is more compliant, you heard from your consultant this evening that both maps are fully compliant. Regarding communities of interest, the consultant also stated this evening that both maps are that meet that criteria as far as communities of interest. So I encourage you to consider all of what you've been hearing, which I'm sure you will, and vote for map A2. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Pollard?
Mayor Nomura and members of the council, I'm sort of new to the process, and I think from what I have seen here tonight, I was kind of suspicious about how map A3 came into being sort of at the 11th hour. It was nice to hear the consultant say there was no communications with any council members, anybody else on, they didn't know where the council members lived, and this was an honest map they came up with because of some very strict criteria. Then at the 11th hour, A3 shows up. Don't know much about it. I don't know if it met any timelines that had to be met for public maps to be submitted, but it seems like it's a clear goal of this map A3 is to get rid of at least one council member, and I don't think the redistricting process is meant to do that. It looks like the consultant did a fair job with all the maps that were submitted. I think the council member that we have, both the mayor and Roy, have the utmost integrity. I don't get along with many people, and I find them to be very outstanding representatives, and I'd like to see map A2. Thank you.
Thank you. Rick Olmsted.
Thank you for the time. No, I'm not going to talk about the beach today, so don't worry about it. I'm here in favor of A2 and not in favor of A3. I really don't understand a lot about redistricting, but I thought I watched the last meeting, and someone made a good point. You're not going to make everybody happy. You're not going to make everybody happy. You have the mobile homes out by Ventura County line, down by Ash, and down all the way to the cemetery. So you're not going to make everybody happy. But a couple things sort of disturb me. I've heard that we're going to vote maybe to keep people out of political, the same voting for this big issue in Carpinteria. I've been a resident of Carpinteria for 75 years. There's always big issues in Carpinteria. There's always big issues. There was a long time ago, 64 when it was incorporated, and after. There's still going to be big issues. So I don't think that should be taken into consideration. What is more disturbing to me is that I've heard, I apologize if it's not correct, but we want to redistrict according to races or cultures. Are you serious? Are you serious? If people in Carpinteria are thinking that way, that's shame on them. I love John Fukusawa. I went to school with his two sons. If he was up there, I think a lot of people would be confused in Carpinteria, apparently. I certainly wasn't. All honorable people, John Fukusawa, all of you I'm sure are honorable. But if I think we're going into the culture or race motivation, that's really bad. And I'm going to sit up here and talk about one individual. One individual up here has been accused of gerrymandering. Fine. If he has, fine. Bring the proof up. If not, be quiet. Bring the proof up, or to me, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a retired school teacher, that's slander. I'm embarrassed for people that are doing that. Come up with the proof. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Giddy White.
Good evening. I'd like to second the comments from Ted Rhodes, Mike Wondolowski, Gil Marshall, and others in support of rejecting map A2 and pursuing map A3. We've heard from community members like Sheila Tenold, and I've heard from others, who are concerned that dividing neighborhoods can dilute community voices. And for me, that's a really big concern. I'd also like to point out that Carpinteria, we're talking about irregularities in a process for mapping. And, that's the kind of thing we see in places like Georgia. And I mean, Carpinteria is not a community that is immune from a history that's problematic, where we have persisted in discriminatory practices after they were condemned on a national level. I don't think any community is immune, but we in particular are not immune. So we have to really look hard. If we have irregularities and we're not respecting geographic boundaries or neighborhood boundaries or major artificial boundaries like roadways, like say Linden Avenue or the 101 or Carp Ave, when we depart from the process, it's potentially problematic. And we're not talking about any current city council members. We're talking about a workable, sustainable system for the community for the long haul. And, it's about adhering to a process. It's about not having the perception of irregularities or anything that might dilute community voices. And, this is a process that we're going down because we were requested to make a fairer system. And it's not just rubber stamping any 5 districts. It's about districts that follow the rules, that will be fairer, that, have public confidence. And when you divide neighborhoods and you make people feel like they're not being heard, it's a real problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kathleen Reddington.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Thank you for your service. A3, please. It's the only way to go. It's fair. It's honest. It's truthful. And it's what I think Carpinteria should be. Let's forget about the kingdom and move on with the city. Thank you.
Thank you. That was my last speaker slip for this item. If there's anyone else wishing to speak, and that would be the time for that. Okay, seeing that, I'll go to the online.
Mayor, we do have 2 public speakers.
Thank you.
David Mercero. David, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Davis.
Hey, everybody. I don't know if it's possible to see me or not. Can you guys hear me? This is my first time zooming in.
We can hear you.
Great. I just wanted to make a comment about the process. I've submitted some feedback to Olivia, who's always been very helpful. And when I had received the map in the mail, I had wanted to participate just as I feel like, the rest of CARP should, as best possible in civic duties. And I've been concerned about the communication process for how this has gone about, and hearing everybody's comments tonight, I think people have brought a lot of good issues to the table across the board. And what concerns me is hearing the inconsistencies from the council as it relates to the adoption of A2, particularly even as it's brought up about the water point, or accusations of gerrymandering, which is if the consultants agree that A2 and 3 have very few differences between them, and both are, quote, legal, that why would gerrymandering be accused of A3 if council men and women had already voted to adopt A2 before public comments and rebuke? And I find that concerning in conjunction with how the redistricting rules were laid out to the public. For instance, when I was asked to draw the map, and I reviewed about 50 of the online submissions as well, it didn't seem to clearly outline that you couldn't go over the highway, for instance, right? And so I looked over about 25 of the maps that seemed to also include various aspects crossing over the 101. And so when I saw A2, it made no sense to me in terms of like what the general public had come up with. And so I had a hard time discerning how the consultants had created A2 to begin with, and that the council had adopted A2 to begin with. And as a follow-up then, how do we move forward, more importantly, as a city in terms of communicating big issues like this? Because I'm very happy to see that people have really jumped in to debate this issue one way or another. And in my opinion, A3 makes sense versus A2, just in terms of what looks like simple, logical boundary lines. But again, I'm more concerned with the process of how this has gone about and the inconsistencies, but I'm also hopeful for how much civic participation it's fostered as well, which I think will be good for a variety of issues moving forward. So I hope it opens the door for more people getting involved.
Thank you, Davis.
Next, we have Fred Shaw. Fred, go ahead.
Actually, this is Fred. My wife, Lisa, is going to speak for both of us.
Howdy, this is Lisa Gurovitz, and we're actually out of town, so we're zooming in and appreciate all the conversation that's taking place, and it really shows a true commitment of our residents that we care so much about this issue. We are in favor of map A3, and it's not a personal thing, and as has been said before, if we wanted to try and keep our current council in, then we would have definitely drawn different kinds of maps altogether. But it's really important that our community come together over this, and I'd really like to see consensus of the city council and that you all come together and support map A3. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. And then lastly, we have Jim Reginato. Jim, go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead, Jim.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to go over all the reasons why I like map A3. Gail Marshall and Donna Jordan and others pretty much filled you in. I just want to say that I think the consultants had an honest process, and they did the best job they could, and they came out with a pretty good product in A2. However, with a few tweakings of A2, we got map A3, and I think it's a much superior map. It's simple and straightforward, and I think it will serve the community well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mayor, that concludes Zoom speakers. And then I just want to note for the record that we did receive written public comment, which was distributed to the council.
Thank you. You could say substantial. We did get good reading material. Thank you. Okay, with that, I will now close public comment, bring it back to the council for a discussion.
Through the mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody involved, the public, the redistricting partners, everybody involved. Staff, I believe, did a great job. I have the utmost respect for all my council members. And I'd like to say a few things about A3. I believe that it's doing away with one community of interest, which is the Villa Real neighborhood off of on the north side of Casitas Pass. I think that should be in District D. And I believe the district over there off of San Ynez, that one should stay in A. I think that's another community of interest on the Santa Barbara side of San Ynez. And could you put one of the district maps up there? I don't care which one it is. And I just want to point out that look at the boundaries of the city. We were talking about we don't like the scattered boundary lines and stuff, and look at our city. How'd that happen? Why is that? And I don't like the word divided when it comes to Star Pine. I don't think the districts really can divide a neighborhood. The only thing that could divide a neighborhood, I think, would be the residents themselves. I think it's a tight-knit neighborhood, and I'm sure there's some that don't get along. I heard about Conchaloma, that I live in a tight-knit neighborhood. There's many of us in Conchaloma that don't agree with each other on a lot of issues. So it's not always what you think it is, a neighborhood, even though you want it to be the ideal neighborhood. And Star Pine could end up with 2 council members representing them. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I just, whoever is elected, the main thing is that everybody votes, okay? And there's no guarantee that any of us up here would even run the next time. So we're talking about one person staying on council. They have to be elected and get the votes to get on here, and it's challenging, it's hard, it's a lot of work, and once you get here, it's even harder work. So it's important to remember that to achieve the goals that benefit the city as a whole, council members have to have that interest and not the interests of a single district. That's their responsibility. So saying that this evening, after hearing everything, the public comment and the redistricting partners, I'm in favor of A2.
Anybody else?
All right, thank you. If you look at the map from A2 to A3, Villarreal from Baylor to Linden, that is a vital route. Hundreds, thousands of our community members use that route every day, and it's vital that we keep that artery intact and not be severed. So, and if you look at the map, what Jason Rodriguez said, the water district and A2 is consistent with each other, and I feel it's important that we keep maps as close as possible. So, going forward, A2 has been out for months. It has plenty of council and public support, input, and discussion. A3 has been out for 2 weeks. It's still in diapers. There's not enough public input, discussion, and it's questionable. So with that, I support A2 because the majority of the public who has been involved since the beginning supports this map, and I support that. So with that said, I move that we approve District Map A2 as the final district map for the City Council District elections, and ordinance number 752 on first reading, and schedule the second reading for the City Council meeting of April 11, 2022.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
I will second it.
We have a motion and a second. I will now open up for further discussion. Anybody else wishing to speak on this item?
Yeah, so there's been a few, well, first, I'd like to, in line with Councilmember Cardy and Lee, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation. It's clear that this is an incredibly important issue for our community, and this, whichever map we move forward with will stand within the next 10 years. But there were some comments that I heard that I hope that staff can clear up, because I feel like it's a little bit of a misconception in terms of the timing of map A3. Given that that it was advertised within 2 weeks, which was within, it should have been, right? We're okay there. And then this still being the 5th hearing, we're still in line with the Fair Maps Act and everything. So this is a legitimate map that we're bringing to the public at a hearing for public comment.
Yes, we did give the proper notice of the 2 maps, which is 7 days.
Okay. So in terms of my other comments, I want to again say that unfortunately, as members of the public have stated, this is not going to be easy. Unfortunately, we will not make everyone happy. By no means is this personal. And if I could keep every single member on the council, I would, but I do not have that authority or power. But in looking at the difference of the 2 maps and what I'm seeing currently, is map A3 really does seem more superior from my perspective. And I do believe it's in line. It has cleaner boundaries. It's more compact. I've heard a lot about Star Pine and the communities of interest. And yes, although that is subjective, it is very clear that that is a neighborhood. And it's a cul-de-sac, dead-end neighborhood. So again, with that, I am in line with A3. And then I did hear the comments in terms of Via Real. But even with A3, it's at that Casitas Pass boundary, and there's an entrance and exit right there at Via Real that I feel like that's still, I don't think we're losing the exit or entrance of that neighborhood in that street.
Thank you. Al?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
I liked map A when I first saw it, and but when we got a closer look at map A2, it just didn't look right. When I had a chance to study it more closely, it appeared that A2 had interfered with communities of interest. We have tonight we've heard a reason why A2 is better, and that is Via Real is the reason why A2 is better. And I just like to say that Via Real is a street; it's not a district. And it's not common to any one district. Via Real runs the whole length of Carpinteria, and all districts on the north are common to it, and all use it. And I'm not sure what the logic is there. I think that, if you live in the Baylor district, then you can get on the freeway at Via Real to the west, or you can get on the freeway at Baylord, or you could even get on the freeway at Highway 150. If you're in the Central District, you could get on the freeway at Via Real by the creek, or you could get on at Linden. And if you're in the other district to the west, it's other ways you can get on the freeway. I'm not sure what the deal about Via Real is. To me, that's not really a reason. We've heard that map A2 is supported by 161 people, and in fact, if you look on the mapping website, there were a lot of maps drawn before A2 came along, and those were drawn by some of those 161 persons. In fact, the precursor of Map A, Lorraine McIntyre says she's the one that first drew it. There are 16 renditions of that use that same configuration, that one census block that's under discussion. But there are many maps that don't use that. All the other maps on the website don't use that configuration. So it's not 161 people that are in support of that map. Map A3 only came along to our consideration on March 14th. But in that time, the support for Map A3 is overwhelmingly in favor of Map A2. A3. I counted one. We have a portal, a website portal where people can put in comments. Since March 14th, 3 people have been in support of A2, and 26 people have been in support of A3. That's an example. We get emails from other sources, but that's just one example. But more importantly, mapping is not a popularity contest. It's a legal process about how we determine our representation for the next 10 years. Map A2 unnecessarily causes a greater population deviation in the town than does Map A3, and it separates neighborhoods such as Star Pine and Pacific Village and Sterling Avenue. I think a very important factor is that when you're looking at community interests, the Baylor, the mobile home parks, that's seems to be a certain community. We got a lot of multifamily housing there. And then the district to the west, where the census block in question asserts its arm into, that's all single-family housing, and that seems to be a community of interest. I mean, they have separate social and economic interests and issues, and I don't think that we should be connecting one to the other. That's just my opinion. Map A2 also weakens Hispanic population in Baylor District. That could weaken the opportunity for a person of color to be elected from Baylor. So I feel that Map A3 is superior to Map A2, and I think we've had a clear reason why we should support Map A2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Through the mayor, could I just clarify a couple things? I didn't say Via Real. I said the neighborhood off of Via Real should be in District D, because it should be. I mean, it's a community of interest. It should be. And then also, it's not a popularity contest. I heard that came up. And I'm going to bring up my email thing again, because I received, I think, 9 or 10 emails since Friday, and I don't give out my personal email, and they were all on my personal email, and my name was even spelled wrong on some of them. So somebody got everybody together, in which I just would appreciate if the emails came to my city email and it was all out in the open. And that bothers me. I'm sorry to say that, but that bothers me.
Yeah, that happened to me too. A lot of people went to my personal email, and it seems like it was one after another. Looking at A3, it looks like it's great if you want to build walls, and that's exactly what it will do. It will divide communities by building those walls. A2, blur those lines, because I believe that council members should represent everybody, regardless of the districts. So if you want to just be a council member in your own district, that's fine, but not me. I'll represent everybody in this community. So.
Thank you. Okay, after we make some comments, first of all, I would like to thank each and every one of you for participating. Sold out crowd. We have everybody here to speak with what they've got, their interest, their comments, their opinions, which is great. The concerns I have with map A3 basically has to do with where it came from. We were given map A2 through the process. That process was followed out, started with the appointment of 2 city council members. Those city council members were then tasked with creating the process. That process was then set in place. Ultimately, our goal and objective was to come forward with a map that would show, or maps, actually it would be 3 maps that we were going to be looking at, to decide at city council which of those 3 maps would be the most advantageous or ones that we could support. Of the 3 maps, A came forward with one minor modification. That A went to A2 when we decided to use the 101 corridor as a dividing point, making sure that we had the one side, the south of the 101, versus the north side, which is the north side of 101. The other concern I have regarding map 3 is actually not really the origin. However, I do have an idea of where it came from. At one time, it actually came with a name to it, which was interesting to me, but it actually came with a name as opposed to a number or anything like that. Along with that introduction of that map, and this is before our hearing that we even saw map A3, were emails, letters to a number of us, I believe just about all of the council members, that included threats, accusations, and disrespect of us in trying to make a decision that we were making. That disrespect said that it was pushing it forward. My concern is I'm tough-skinned. I mean, you could make fun of me all day long. I won't take it personally. I won't take offense to it. However, one of the challenges that I see and one of the results that usually occur from this, quote, bullying tactic is that there is another agenda that we're not seeing. I think that is one of the issues and one of the concerns I personally see. I'm not seeing the whole picture. Otherwise, as the way Carpinteria always works. If you need something done, you ask for a favor. In Carpinteria, any Carpinteria would say, well, yeah, if you need help, we'll come out and we will help you. We don't come over and they go, well, you know what, maybe, but they're going to give us a threat instead. That doesn't usually happen in Carpinteria. That's why I was surprised this process included that in the process. Unfortunately, it did happen, and it was just a handful of people, but those people were ones that I had respected because they were leaders in this community, and I had the utmost respect for them until this happened. Unfortunately, it did happen. We move on. I'm a forgiving, forgetting kind of guy, so I'm not going to worry about it now. However, because of that process and what we've seen, knowing that the process brought forward one map, A, and then was converted to A2, we gave the opportunity for another map to come forward. I see the advantages of both maps. However, because of the way the process ran itself, I would have to support A2. So at this time, I am going to call for a vote.
Vice Mayor Clark?
No.
Councilmember Cardy?
Aye.
Councilmember Alarcon?
No.
Councilmember Lee?
Aye.
And Mayor Nomura?
Aye. I would like to close this one because of the fact that this has been so controversial. My apologies to everybody, but when you have two different selections having to be made, you've got to live with the best one you can. With that, everybody, thank you very much for your time. We will now move on to the next item, and then we will take a break after this one. Okay.
I think it's for the Soaring community, so I think they meant 17.
Okay, gotcha, thank you. The rest of these are all 17, Brian? Thank you. Got it, I got it, I'm good, thanks. Okay, we will now move to item number 16. This is adoption of ordinance of 753, first reading approving the sequence schedule for district elections concerning the 5 council districts in the city of Carpinteria. And with that, could I have staff report, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Similar to the last item, we're going to approach this presentation in a team approach. I'll give kind of an overview of what the sequencing schedule is about, talk about some of the guidance we have for establishing a sequencing schedule, and then I'll turn it over to Olivia to talk a little bit about some general rules that apply from law to all sequencing, no matter what sequencing the council chooses, kind of the way that it plays out. And also, Mr. Paul Mitchell is here again to provide his expertise and answer any questions related to how the law applies to this process. And of course, our city attorney is here, who's been working closely with the consultant and staff on this matter. Once your council has chosen a map, which it did on the prior item, now it has a process for what's called a sequencing schedule to determine how the numbering of the districts will apply to each district. We've been lettering districts as labels up to this point, and it's common practice then to number the districts from this point forward and to assign those numbers to a particular election. So in Carpinteria, we have biennial elections every 2 years and on an alternating 3-2 seats. So in the next election in 2022, 3 seats will be up for election, and then in 2024, 2, and it alternates back and forth. So for this first election, as we transition to district elections, there will be 3 seats up this November. So the process, importantly, is about which 3 districts will go first, and you would number them then in some way to reflect that. It's important to note that district election will be phased over 2 election cycles. So the 3 seats that are up for district elections in 2022 will result in district elected council members that are elected by those district only. So we'll have a hybrid for 2 years because we'll have both district council members and at-large council members. So again, it's important that it's to know that it's phased in. Council members that continue in their at-large seats will continue to serve in those roles until the end of their term. In 2024, the final two district representative council members will be elected, and then we'll have the full implementation of district elections. And it's important because the law says that no council members will lose their seats. That's why it's done that way. Cities transition in because it has to occur over at least two elections in order to get everybody on to district elections over that period of time. The numbering system that we've shown in the staff report is that odd numbers be for the 3 seats and even for the 2. That seems to be the practice that most, if not all, cities follow. I don't believe this is, Paul can chime in if there's any guidance in state law, but I think Jenna has looked into this, and we have not found anything that mandates that the city follow that order, but it's what is the common practice. So we're recommending you follow the common practice, and that 1, 3, and 5 be the numerical labels given to the districts that you choose to go first in 2022, and then 2 and 4 are the districts that will go second in 2024. And of course, you can apply those anywhere, and I'll get to some examples that we've shown here. So the basis for which go first, there's a few factors to consider, and again, less so than the prior item. This is guidance that's provided, but not mandates. The CVRA suggests that cities prioritize high Latino, what's called CVAC districts, or voting age population, so citizen voting age population that have high Latino districts should be considered either in the first election to get representation as soon as possible, give the opportunity for representation, or in a presidential election year, which would provide the greatest turnout, the greatest chance for getting the representation that district chooses. So those things could be different, and they would be in our situation, right? The nearest election is 2022, which is a non-election year, 2024. Do those things compete? No, they're just priorities for you to consider. And it may be that you can apply both. In our case, you've got 3 different high Latino voting age population districts, over 30%. So you can actually have one district or more in the first election year, and then another in the presidential election year. And in fact, when we get to the numerical, Olivia's put it up on the screen here, that is what would play out if you elected to go the route that we've demonstrated here in terms of the sequencing schedule. So another factor of the 3 is prioritizing districts without historical representation or no current representative. So in many cities, they have areas that have been underrepresented on elected city council, or they've never had a representative on city council. We have not gone back into the record to look at that, but currently there's 2 districts that do not have representation. One, District 1, or which was known as District C on your prior maps, down along the beach area in the west end of town, and pardon?
I think that's the only one.
Oh, that's the only one. That's right. If you elected A3, there would have been 2. But in A2, there's just 1 district without representation. That's District 1 on this map. So you could choose to prioritize that in the first district. If you choose the numbering sequence of 1, 3, 5 to go in the first district, this would do that. This would select District 1 to go first, which doesn't currently have any representation, and would get it as soon as possible. So prioritizing that is another option for your council. And then the third is avoiding eliminating opportunities for council members to run as incumbents. If you were to, and this, for example, there's 3 council members that are up for election 2022. If you would prioritize the districts coming up for election in 22 such that one of the incumbents didn't have an opportunity to run, that is what the guidance suggests, or many cities by practice have determined not to do. So they've tried to avoid eliminating opportunities for council members to run as incumbents. And this can include in the next election or a situation where council members are allowed to run sooner than they come up for election. So those are the three guidance points or past practices that other cities have implemented. And for your consideration tonight, there's other things you can take into consideration, of course, but those are the common factors that cities consider. And I'll turn it over to Olivia, I should say, to talk about other factors that are considered under law for sequencing schedule.
Dave, or through the mayor, I know this doesn't really relate right now, but we can't use the information on how many people in each district vote?
Sure, you can look at that, yes.
I mean, do we know how many people in each district voted last time?
We don't have that data in front of us right now. We know, of course, the voting age population, which is a part of the data that you've been given. But in terms of how many people within each of those districts actually turned out to vote, we don't have that data.
Yeah, because it'd be interesting to see, in a district maybe only 50 people voted. I don't know.
So I will talk about two parts of this, and one is what is in the ordinance. This ordinance, what is asked of this item is to amend the chapter that was just adopted to the municipal code and to add one section which includes the commencement and sequence of district elections. And that is to do two things: to add a number to the sequence, to what was previously a letter, and in the distinction of the districts. And the second is to decide what districts will be elected in 2022 and which districts will be will be elected in 2024. So I just want to address a few frequently asked questions or questions that could come up about how this impacts current council members or council members. So one is council members whose terms expire in 2022 may continue to serve the city at large for the remainder of their elected terms and have an opportunity to run for district-based seats in November of 2022, provided that they reside in one of the three districts that will be scheduled for election in 2022. Two, council members whose term does not expire until 2024 may continue to serve the city at large. So they will continue to be at-large representatives until their term ends in 2024, at which time, if they reside in one of the two districts, they can run for election. If multiple incumbents live in the same council district and that election is held in the district in 2022, the incumbents are eligible to run for election in that district along with any other candidates. The person who receives the most votes will win the seat for that district for a 4-year term as a by district elected. Any losing incumbent will drop off the city council either immediately if their term expires in 2022, or they will serve until the end of until 2024, at which time their term ends. In other words, even if a current council member whose elected term ends in 2024 runs for and is defeated in a bid to win a district-based seat in 2022, that council member will continue to serve on the city council as an at-large council member until their elected term expires. If a current council member whose term ends in 2024 wins a district election in 2024, then they would resign their at-large seat. And in order to fill that vacancy, pursuant to California Government Code 36512, the vacancy would be filled by appointment or a special election. And lastly, after the sequencing schedule is adopted, if there's no council members that reside in a district that's scheduled for that election in November 2022, then only only non-incumbents will be qualified to run for the election in that district. If nobody runs, if no council member resides in a district scheduled for November 2024 election, then that district will continue to be represented by the remaining at-large council member until 2024, when the first district-based election takes place. We can answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, good job.
That concludes our report. You have ordinance number 753 before you tonight that, if you adopt it on first reading, we'll hold the second reading on April 11th, along with ordinance number 752. They will go as a package and be provided with other information to county elections.
Thank you.
Just so to make clear, so here's the map that's up here that provides the sequencing. So C becomes 1, 2 is A, 3 was B, 4 D, and 5 E.
Thank you. Any questions of staff now?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. My question is about the ordinance in section number 4. What sort of situation would require the city manager to redraw the lines?
Yeah, thank you. I know that comment also came up through public written comments. This is a standard provision that's in just every one of the sample ordinances we looked at from other cities. And it's intended to be an administrative remedy, specifically to ensure that residents are not moved from district to district. So when we submit this map, it's based on the base map for these district elections, as you may recall, is based on census blocks. County elections for establishing precincts will use a parcel-based map. So we have parcel-based maps that we're going to have to jibe with block group maps. And sometimes, there might be slightly off. We want to ensure that people don't get displaced from one to another. So we want to jibe. If there were ever a situation where, we actually had to substantively change a district boundary for some reason, and I asked Paul Mitchell, our consultant, if that had ever happened. He said he could think of one situation with community college districts that were representing areas in 2 separate counties, and they didn't know it. And so after the fact, they had learned this and had to go back and make adjustments. So it's highly unusual. We don't think it'll come back here. And in particular, our oversight of this administratively is to ensure that doesn't happen as we get with the county and make sure that the lines from our district mapping process jibe with their parcel-based precinct mapping.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will now open this up for public comment. I have 3 in hand. However, I think a couple of them are misnumbered. I'm going to, just to confirm that, I have the first one is Helen O'Neill. If you're speaking on this one, otherwise I will move it to the next item. Okay, I'll move that one forward. Kathleen Reddington.
Not here.
Not here. Okay. How about George Jimenez?
He's on the next one also.
Okay, good enough.
They're all on the next one.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Perfect. That works well. Okay, online there, Brian?
Mayor, there are no Zoom speakers.
Okay, thank you.
However, we did, again, for the record,
Thank you.
We did receive written public comment, which was distributed to the council.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Okay. With that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the council. Anybody wishing to take action on this or any comments, discussion?
Mayor, I do. I move to adopt ordinance number 753, approving the sequencing schedule for district elections concerning 5 council districts in the city of Carpinteria.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I will second.
Okay. We have a motion, and a second. I'll ask staff, do we need clarification on that motion? Okay, great, good job. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I think it's important as we're moving forward with our new districts. I heard in one comment previously talking about ethnicity and race, and we shouldn't be going in that direction. But I want to point out that although district elections, yes, were forced upon us, a plus side of that is that minorities now have the opportunity to run and possibly win. And I really, really hope that the council, I don't know why I'm getting all emotional. I don't want to be, and Councilmember Cardy mentioned that only 10% of Latinos vote. I don't know how true that is. I tried to inquire and investigate, and I had to go through a lot of raw data that I just didn't have the time to do. But I really hope that moving forward, we look at that as a positive thing in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. No, very good point, and there's a good reason that you're emotional on that one. We see the same. We look right now at the complexion of our council. It's very diverse, extremely diverse, and I'd like to thank everybody for that, especially the voters for what you've done to make it that way. So we have to keep track of that, and it's not one specific minority. We have to look and honor all minorities. It's one thing that we have done well in Carpinteria. Any other discussion points? Okay, with that, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor Clark?
Aye.
Councilmember Cardy?
Aye.
Councilmember Alarcon?
Aye.
Councilmember Lee?
Aye.
And Mayor Namura?
Aye. Thank you. At this time, we have a few more items, but I'm going to suggest we take about a 10-minute break.